Let me put you in the role of president or prime minister of a country in Africa. And by the way, this could be a country anywhere. Okay. Your legislature has given you money now to build a port, a railroad, something. Okay. You have 2 years to get it done. So the Chinese will come up with a bid that says, we will get it done in a year and a half. We will bring in our own suppliers. We will bring in our own managerial talent. We'll work with brokers to get local labor, and bam, we're done, right? Or do you hire local firms that may not have had as much experience building large-scale infrastructure the way the Chinese have, but you're contributing to your local economy more. You are diverting those funds domestically and not to foreign suppliers like the Chinese. Your political future, in many respects, is on the line, depending on whether or not you can deliver this big piece of infrastructure. And let me remind you that it is not easy to deliver this infrastructure. I sit in a city here in Ho Chi Minh City, where they started a subway 12 years ago, and it still is not done. Okay, Mr. President, Mr. Prime Minister, what do you do?
This is a tough question, but I think the direction I would go in, but I can imagine I would hit a lot of barriers, but the direction I would go in would be a kind of a hybrid between the two, where the project is run by the Chinese, but one is an interventionist African government in the sense that one sets up some kind of mechanism for more formal, more implemented training of the local companies. Whatever, you select a group of local companies and you kind of embed them with the Chinese, and then you hunt among your kind of recent graduates from China, your African students who had been studying in China, to set up a translation and interpreting team to facilitate the interactions between the two. That would be roughly my approach, but I can foresee many people pushing back, particularly the Chinese, who would be saying like, look, this is gonna slow everything down. It's going to make everything very complicated. This is not how we do business. So I can imagine that it would get a lot of pushback. But I think this kind of proactive kind of, in the first place, kind of just drawing on the chapter, knowing how complicated the work is being made through language barriers. I mean, that's the first thing. But then also to just be very cognizant of the need for, once that project is done, it's not enough for the company to just pack up and leave and take all the skills with them. There has to be skills that stay in Africa. And that kind of just has to be the bottom line, I think, for African governments. And that, of course, makes things a lot more complicated, but that's the kind of key to making them more valuable, I think.
Well, of course, the irony here was, and this is something that Professor Deborah Browdegem talks about in her book, what was it? The Dragon's Gift? Was that the book?
That was the first one, yes.
That was the first one, yeah. And she talks a lot about the skills transfers in the 70s and 80s by the Japanese to China, and how the Chinese later in the 80s and 90s required all the joint ventures and foreign engagements and foreign partnerships they mandated skills transfers. So this is a topic, by the way, that the Chinese are intimately familiar with because they themselves in many ways perfected it, but yet don't necessarily do that when they go abroad. The problem is that I can foresee is that the Chinese would say, sure, no problem. We're going to do more skills transfer. We'll get those graduates. We'll set up institutes. But it's going to take more time and more money to do your project.
Yeah, I can totally imagine. And probably for good reason.
And for good reason. And that's where I can imagine that, coming back to domestic politics, that a lot of those folks in the legislature or in the factions that control the money for this infrastructure say, you know what? I don't really care. I just want to get this road done, or I just want to get this bridge done. That's my biggest priority, because I'm going to run and my power base is going to be impacted by whether or not I deliver this infrastructure.
Definitely. I mean, I can definitely see that. And I think that is the calculus among many African decision makers. On the counterpoint, I would say that integrating this kind of local stakeholdership more and being able to setting up something where there's more skills transfer and better communication will probably end up saving time in the short term by just avoiding kind of labor disputes and local community disputes, which we've also seen is a big problem on Chinese work sites. But in the slightly longer term, it will buy you, it will have political payoff, particularly if one is, if that site that work site happens to be in some kind of voting community where, where you can demonstrate, for example, local employment benefits. So, so it's not necessarily that the benefits and the costs are not only one-sided. They kind of happen on both sides, depending on, whichever one of the approaches one takes. But yeah, I can definitely see that it would probably slow down proceedings.